Hi, thanks for joining us. I'm here today with Mark Sanborn, author of Up, Down, or Sideways, How to Succeed When Times Are Good, Bad, or In Between. Thank you for joining us today, Mark.
Ben, nice to be with you.
Hey, I've been a fan of yours since I first saw you speak at the Chick-fil-A LeaderCast years ago now, I think it is. And of course, read Fred Factor, and I'm a big fan of your books, and excited to talk to you today about Up, Down, or Sideways.
Well, and I'm a fan of the work you do at Modern Servant Leader, and I guess we probably became acquainted when you took great notes from my Chick-fil-A LeaderCast comments, and I was receiving Google alerts, and I said, I've got to get to know this guy, and that's how I learned more about you and your work. So the admiration and respect is mutual.
Well, thank you. You're very kind. When I read Up, Down, or Sideways, what I liked about it was it kind of reminded me of Good to Great in a way, where Good to Great is about, taking an organization that's really good and taking it to the next level and making it great. And in a way, Up, Down, or Sideways to me was kind of like that for the individual. You may be doing all right now, but this is about succeeding, beyond just right now and in all times. It's not a get rich quick kind of scheme or anything like that, but to me it kind of seemed very similar from the taking it to the next level perspective.
Well, as I think about the book, as the author, and a lot of my perspective has become clearer after the book came out. It's funny how you can write something and kind of understand it better after it's been out for a while. I call it a Be Successful Always book, because I think that there are things that we do in life that serve us in any market condition, in any circumstance, whether we're having good times or bad or somewhere in between. What's interesting to me about the book is because of the economy and whether we're coming out of the recession and things are getting better or not, I think the verdict is still out. I think people have kind of glommed onto the bad or the down rather than the good and the up. I mean, it's just natural with 8.5% unemployment.
Yeah.
A lot of people are saying these are not heady high times. How do I succeed? Not because of, but in spite of. But of course, I wrote the book so that it wouldn't be relegated to a particular circumstance. I think too many books and too much advice is situation specific, and we're always chasing the future. Well, things are good now. What should we be doing differently than when they're bad? Or things are somewhat trending sideways. What should we be doing to make them better? And there are certainly good books with good advice about that. But I wanted to answer the question, what should we always be doing? That if we did those things, they would mitigate the downsides, help us take full advantage of the upsides, and make the most of those sideways movements. And so I appreciate I'm a big fan of Good to Great, and of course was a highly researched book for organizations. This is an anecdotal and observational book, and a very personal book based on my 53 years so far of life and what I've learned from studying some very successful leaders and some very successful people.
And really a series of recent events, right? I mean, you mentioned in the book, of course, the trifecta or, perfect storm, if you will, of challenges you faced recently. And I think that had some input too, obviously, to the book, right?
It was kind of the pivotal point for me. It's the most personal book I've written, and then I talk about myself. I'm reticent to talk about myself because I think most readers really, as much as they may like you, they don't really care that much about what happened to you. What they want to know is what can I learn from it?
That's fair.
And I'm not the kind of person that likes to focus attention on myself. But on the other hand, having written some books that have done very well, occasionally I run across the person that says, you've led a charmed life. How the heck would you know what it's like to deal with difficulties and setbacks? So the answer to that is I began the book by talking about a period in 2008 where I had very high-paid financial advice that got me out of the market at the very bottom, and then didn't get me back in the market during the run-up. So I took a significant hit in our financial investments. Because there was a recession, the meetings industry, which is how I make my living, was hammered. So there was a decline in business. And to add to that, I was recovering from cancer surgery all the same time. That's the trifecta, or that perfect storm. And I don't share that to get any kind of sympathy. I'm cancer-free, thankfully, and grateful for that.
Wonderful.
The economy's better, my business is better, my investments are better. But the reason I share that is because in the midst of all those challenges, I felt very blessed and very confident about the future, which some people might think is a bit delusional. But for me, it reminded me, it clarified something that we all know but tend to forget, especially in good times. And that is, for me, I still had my faith, family, and friends. Everything else also is icing on the cake. And I think we sometimes confuse the cake and the icing. We think that the cake is booming business, or investments that are appreciating, or relationships that are solid or stable.
Yeah.
And certainly faith, family, and friends suggests that there are some relationships that are pivotal. But the entirety of our lives is more about the core than it is the trappings. And for me, the core is that faith, family, and friends, which I know is a common phrase that we hear a lot, but it really took on new meaning. And I felt like, despite the downturn, things were going to get better. And because, this is the key thing, Ben, I've been doing some things that prepared me for that. I didn't know it was going to be. Didn't know there was going to be a recession. Didn't know I was going to have knucklehead advice about when to get out of the market.
Right.
But I had been doing some things that kept those from leveling me. And that was what became the launching pad for the mindsets and the methods that I talk about in the book.
Got it. And then in the book, you break it out into 3 basic sections, right? You got see, think, and do. And at a high level, you want to just kind of touch on what each of those are and, what they cover.
I got hammered by some reviewer about being simplistic, but of course, I've learned that reviewers, are often frustrated writers. And if it's something I can learn from a reviewer, I do, but mostly I ignore the reviews.
Good advice there.
Simplicity, not being simplistic. The simplicity is you've got to frame a problem before you can solve it.
Yeah.
And that's what the C is. The challenge is that I begin the book is that we don't control all the forces that affect us. And there's this big myth in our culture to be proactive. And I will say proactive is great to the degree you can do it. But as I read the Wall Street Journal this morning, I saw no articles on the front page that I had any control over.
Yep.
Now, I saw some articles that will affect me, but not that I had control over.
Right.
So we've got to see the challenges. How do we interact with all the forces that affect us to create the outcome we desire? And I talk about surfing as a great metaphor.
Yeah.
Only Mother Nature can make a wave, but a surfer is the kind of person who can create the outcome he or she desires by how they interact with the wave. That's what the C part of the book is. The think is the mental mindset. What are those thought processes that serve us well? And then the do part is what do we have to do? Because it's not enough to think clearly, to see the problem, think clearly. Ultimately, we have to take action. Hence the see, think, and do.
Got it. Great. And for the record, I think, people definitely want something very complex to digest. They don't want it simplified. So
no, I think that the ability to complexify is a great demand in our culture. If you think if it's simple, it must not be valid.
Absolutely. Of course. No, but on a more serious note, I did like one of the things that really stood out for me was when you talk about defining your version of success. One of the things that stands out for servant leaders, I believe, is they don't always feel like they're living by society's standards or norms, where most people are out there about, fame, money, fortune. The servant leader is really out there about making the organization better, improving the lives of their stakeholders. Can you tell me a little bit about what you mean when you say your version of success and why that's so important?
Well, I think probably most of the people listening and watching are familiar with that phrase that how you keep score determines how you play the game, which I call in the book the scorekeeper's secret. The problem is that a lot of people work very hard to achieve someone else's dreams. They buy into this kind of cultural norm, and those norms aren't always positive. Back in the late 50s, early 60s, there was a cartoon strip that gave us a wonderful colloquialism that most people are familiar with. The cartoon strip was about the Joneses, and the phrase is keeping up with the Joneses.
Yes.
And the character of that was that you always benchmark not against what you wanted, but what the neighbors were doing. They bought a new car, you needed a new car.
Yep.
They painted their house, you painted your house.
Yep.
And it became a character of the American dream, which is that, in America, you can pursue whatever dreams you have. You have that freedom to do that. Well, suddenly it became about pursuing some imposed definition of success. And so I'm trying to get people back in touch with this idea that if you're playing by somebody else's scorekeeping system, even when you win, you lose. I often use the example of educators. I mean, we could debate, do good teachers get paid enough? Good teachers don't get paid enough. Bad teachers probably get paid too much. But the reality is there are certain professions that you don't go into to get rich.
Yeah.
And I sometimes, my mother was a teacher for 35 years. I would sometimes hear teachers say, man, I love to teach, but I resent that I don't get paid more. And I empathize with that. but at some point you have to come to terms with what's the important value. If
Right.
you really love to teach, then regrettably, unless a new Congress and Senate and president get elected and change the teaching profession, you're not going to make as much as the high-tech executive in Silicon Valley. If the money really is it, and I'm casting no judgment here,
Oh,
if the
right.
money really is it, go for the money.
Yeah.
But don't get caught in this dilemma where you say one thing is important, but you act as if something else is more important. And that's what the Scorekeeper Secret's about.
I love it. And I love what you said there. If you're playing by somebody else's definition of success, either way you lose. I think that's a fantastic quote. I really like the way you framed it.
You've heard there's an old saying, that make sure you got your ladder leaned on the right wall, or else when you get to the top, you're going to be at the top of the wrong. You're going to be in the wrong place.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. As sort of a follow-up, the other perspective that I thought really aligned with servant leadership was the practicing gratitude. Servant leaders a lot of times are talking about, pulling in the blame, but making sure they're deflecting the praise. So when, somebody comes to them and says, wow, that project you delivered was fantastic, they're all about saying, well, hey, I only played one role. Really, it was about this larger team. And you talk a lot in the book about practicing gratitude and how critical it is to actually execute the gratitude, actually deliver, on not just, holding it and thinking about it. Can you expand on that maybe a little?
You bet. In another book, my book, You Don't Need a Title to Be a Leader, I say that, and I paint with a broad brushstroke because, as you know, I write short books, but I said, managers take credit, but leaders give credit.
Yes.
Really, the more accurate way to say that is that leaders share credit, because I see this kind of denigration sometimes that people go through. I think we insult others when we don't accept praise. When one of my favorite stories, and I'm trying to remember who I heard first tell this, is about a youth pastor who watches a youth leader at college give a presentation, and at the end, the youth pastor says to the presenter, you did a good job. And the kid, trying to eat humble pie, says, oh, shucks, pastor, it wasn't me, it was Jesus. And the pastor said, no, if it was Jesus, it'd have been a lot better.
That's good.
And that's kind of what happens when we try to eat humble pie is what was meant as a sincere compliment. The kid did a good job, gets deflected, I can't take any credit. Well, what we can do as leaders, though, is share credit. Very few things in life do we accomplish of significance by ourselves. Right. And I think we sometimes overreact from being the person that takes the credit, places the blame, to being the person that takes no credit when it's credit's due. So I just wanted to point that out, because I think that we denigrate the person who is sincerely grateful when we don't take gracious credit for what we've done. Having said that, I have a different take on attitude. Most people think that the opposite of a negative attitude is a positive attitude. I think the opposite of a negative attitude is gratitude. I think that gratitude is the antidote to negativity, because when you focus on whatever you have to be grateful for, and there's always something, some days there's more than others, but when you focus on what you're truly grateful for, you start to turn that tide of negativity. Practicing gratitude is not about thinking it or knowing it. It's about expressing your gratefulness to others. You're married, I'm married. I can tell my wife I love her. But if I don't show her, it don't count.
Yeah.
It's not about what I think, it's about what I do. And gratitude takes us outside ourselves. First of all, it benefits us because it keeps us from becoming self-absorbed. But beyond that, it's a way for us to kind of become conduits and channels rather than reservoirs. Good things happen to us, and instead of just keeping those good things, we look for a way to kind of multiply and increase them by expressing or demonstrating gratitude to others.
I love it. And again, another great quote. Gratitude is the antidote to negativity. Love that. Love that. Kind of continuing on the gratitude, and the positive atmosphere, you mentioned in the book that, optimism is really important and hope is important. And you admit that this is kind of something that you've struggled with in the past yourself, or continue to develop maybe.
Continue to struggle with, sure.
Yeah. And why is it that that's so important? Because, there's some people right now who are obviously struggling. As we mentioned, the economy certainly hasn't gone right back. If it is turning, it's still got a ways to go. How is it that hope and optimism is such a key part of being successful, and when times are up, down, or in between?
Well, we're lucky that we lived long enough to see neuroscience confirm what the great philosophers and theologians have always told us, and that is that our mental predisposition substantively affects performance. Sean Aker, who I quote in the book, and has written one of my favorite books on happiness called The Happiness Advantage, because he was at Harvard. I mean, this is a pretty heady institution. He did research at Harvard. He consolidated over 250 studies that basically can be summarized very succinctly in this idea. We are not happy because we are successful. We are successful because we're happy.
Wow.
And to unpack that, what he's saying is that because of the effects on our brain, our optimism, it predisposes us to perform better, to be less stressed, to be more appreciative, to pay better attention. All those things that help us sell more. And Martin Seligman did some of the seminal research where he was able to demonstrate that what he called explanatory style, for those people who are really into this, explanatory style allowed insurance salespeople to sell 38% more. He quantified a number of how much more people with a positive explanatory style, or what you and I, Ben, would call attitude, were able to sell. So what I tell people is if you're waiting for your life to improve, to become happy and optimistic, you got it backwards.
Yeah.
First of all, appreciate what you've got. Become optimistic, not blindly optimistic. You know, sometimes in the book I talk about this because I hear it so much from my friends in the speaking profession. You know, there's a recession, but we choose not to participate. That sounds really good, and I appreciate the sentiment behind it. But I say that's a little like standing in the middle of a rainstorm and saying it's raining, but I'm not getting wet.
Right.
No, you're not getting wet, but maybe you've taken precautions to keep from getting soaked. You know, maybe you're wearing a raincoat. You know, I mean, when somebody says we're not participating in a recession, what they're saying to me is we're winning despite the recession, which is admirable.
Yes.
But denial to me is it's insulting. You know, an adult that can pay a mortgage and raise children doesn't want to hear that they can opt out of a recession. They're affected by it. Now, they can still succeed, but they are affected by it.
Right.
So it's not about denying reality. It's about choosing where we focus our attention. I'm recording in a couple weeks a series that's coming out this year called Your Year of Success with 3 other colleagues.
Oh,
And
excellent.
I was reminded of my first trip to Rome. I stayed at a place called the Hotel Eliseo, and I got this amazing room, panoramic view of the city.
Wow.
Couldn't understand why I got such a good room. Originally, I was on the first floor, and I asked for an upgrade, and the guy puts me in this nice room. And as I'm looking out, I hear what sounds like a train wreck. It's this gnashing of metal and crashing, and I realize my room is up against an elevator shaft. and it becomes clear to me that this is a metaphor for life, the good and the bad, the ugly and the beautiful. And here's the deal.
Wow.
I could either focus on the noise or I could focus on the view. Focusing on the view didn't make the noise go away. You know, I wasn't able to, come into some kind of zen-like state where I no longer heard it. It just meant that I accepted the reality that, I got a great view, I got a noisy room. And I could have chosen a quiet room with a lesser view.
Yeah.
Or focus on the view. That's what optimism is. Optimism is about what you focus on. And too many people go through life going, I got a great view, but I just hate this annoying little bell that keeps chiming, or that they focus on the negative.
Yeah. Very, very well put. Yeah, good metaphor. Finally, I wanted to ask you, I saw in the book you mentioned Woody Hayes, the Ohio State football coach, great. And, I know you're a Buckeye, and as a Penn State Nittany Lion, I won't hold that against you, I promise.
It's good that we're able to be collegial despite that, right?
Yeah, absolutely. No, but of course, they're not certainly on the same level or scale, but I know Woody Hayes, after a terrific career, left under, unfortunate circumstances when he shoved the opposing player. And Joe Paterno, recently passed, and I remain a big fan of the man. We're still waiting to hear what comes out of all this, of course. But with his recent passing and the series of events that led to his dismissal, I wonder, do you have any advice? I mean, when somebody feels like they're in just that horrible crisis of a state where it feels like everything's crashing around them, what advice would you give somebody like that who's just, tremendous career, and all of a sudden it's coming to an abrupt end under unfortunate circumstances, or something similar where it's just really dire? Do you have any advice in those situations? I mean, that's kind of the penultimate, except for maybe health conditions, of the down.
Well, I would say probably even above health conditions, because you can lose your health and still maintain your integrity, and that's really what it's a question
Good
of.
point.
And again, there are people who are going to form their own opinions. I'm with you. I don't think we know quite enough about the situation with Joe Paterno. It's a tragic situation. It's not about sports. It's about ethics and morality and what's right. Woody Hayes was a little different. It was certainly a scandalous thing on a different magnitude because he pushed a player.
Yeah, absolutely.
But, the thing about, and I can't speak to Joe Paterno, I do know this about Woody Hayes. I was there when it happened at Ohio State. I was a student. And after Woody Hayes retired in disgrace, from that incident, he continued to speak and demand quite high fees to different groups all over the United States. And what most people don't know is that Woody donated all that money back to the athletic department, the football program at Ohio State.
Wow.
Now, it would have been very easy to say, well, heck with them. If they're going to treat me like that, if they're going to castigate me and cast me aside because of a mistake, and who doesn't make mistakes? It's just a matter of magnitude and timing.
Yeah.
What I think spoke to his integrity was he never placed blame. He never said, no, that replay camera is lying. I didn't really push the guy. It was, he was caught in the act, but he still overcame that and continued to be a contributor. Joe Paterno, I can't help but think with his health that the stress of that incident's probably contributed to his demise. And that's again tragic.
Yeah.
But I think the question is, we'll all deal with setbacks. Hopefully not of a major moral failing. Well, it happens in leadership. First of all, it pays to safeguard with accountability, to have people in our lives that keep us honest, so that something doesn't crawl out from beneath the rug, come out of the closet later that takes us down.
But
that aside, I think we all have to come to terms with the fact we all make mistakes. It's about how we respond to those mistakes that really show as much about our character and integrity as the mistakes we make.
Yes. Excellent point. Thank you. Any final thoughts before we close? Anything for prospective readers or people who have read it you wanted to share with them before we close?
Well, I hope if anyone's interested in kind of the panoramic view of my work, my website, marksanborn.com, talks about my last 4 books. My work is focused on leadership and turning the ordinary into the extraordinary. My last book was probably as close to a self-help book, which my friend Henry Cloud says self-help is an oxymoron. The greatest help comes from a community of others, and I do agree with it. But I believe that there are things that we have to take responsibility for, and that in the context of community, that's where the greatest change takes place. But if anyone wants to kind of see what my work is about, it is about always to give people hope, which is, as I define it in Up, Down, or Sideways, having something new to try and being willing to try it. And especially as a leader, I'm working on some new material now. The 3 most hated words in leadership are I don't know. We live in the age of I don't know. We live in the age of wanting someone to say this is what's happening, this is what we should do. But at the very best, it's conjecture, it's opinion. We can't predict the future with 100% accuracy, so we often have to act, not because we know we're certain, but because we don't know. And I think that's the new question of leadership. What do you do when you don't know what to do? And that's what I think in the future, one of the things I'm going to look at in my work is how to find some redemption from not just our mistakes, but from our uncertainties that will help us move into the future, not with any guarantees, but with faith and confidence.
I love it. And I'm interested in hearing about that year of success, too. That sounds exciting. I'm looking forward to seeing it. And folks can find you it's just marksanborn.com, right?
Marksanborn.com, Facebook, Mark Sanborn, speaker, or Twitter, Mark_Sanborn. Boy, I tell you, the social media, it'll be nice when somebody comes up with a single way to connect to all those social networks.
Yeah, and it's getting closer, I think, but we're not quite there yet. Well, if you haven't seen it, it's Up, Down, or Sideways, How to Succeed When Times Are Good, Bad, or In Between. Highly recommend it. Great book. Thank you again, Mark, for joining us, and have a great weekend.
And you keep up the great work there.
Thank you very much.